If I just load up our files from last week, you'll notice something. First thing it does is it takes the user account that you're logged on to your machine with, and it puts that comment in there, right? And it date stamps it. I won't say who it was. I actually had 2 students who gave me lab 3 with the exact same name on the file and submitted it separately. Those 2 students don't have the same name. So I would ask, if you're going to cheat, at least make an honest effort at cheating and try to fool me. Don't give me work with another student's name on it, ask me to mark it, and try to tell me you did it yourself. Okay. So yes, this really happened. So there are students, I won't say who they are, I won't say what section they're in. They got 0 on the lab and they've had to accept an academic misconduct charge on their student records because they both had the same name in here and the rest of their code was the same. The only thing that was different was down here. They changed the message in the console log. So the rest of the whole lab was the same, including the name on the top line, and they changed the message there because somehow that was going to make me think each person did it themselves. Really, I'm not kidding you. This stuff really happens. I'm a little disappointed. We didn't even make it through September, the whole month of September, without me getting 2 identical assignments from students. Okay. So just a warning and a request, please don't do this. Okay, it's a big waste of everybody's time. And as I said to those students, I can't mark it because I don't know who did which part. So there's no way for me to assign marks. I don't know if one student genuinely did all the work and the other one did 0, or they each contributed to it. So the answer is they both have a 0 on this lab. So today we're going to work with Expres. Next week we'll start adding in we'll get set up with MongoDB and adding our database. I'll probably email you sometime next week with a link asking you to set up where you can download and install MongoDB. And also you can get set up with a cloud service where you can host your database online. So those are both free. I'll send you those links. We probably won't have time to do it today, but I'll ask everyone to do it before next week's class. So when you come in, we can just start working with it. We don't have to take up class time next week installing and getting set up with those accounts. So what we're going to use today is Expres. So far, the first few weeks of class, we've been doing everything with Node at a really low level. And Node was originally just designed as network communication. It's not specifically for web. So we could get Node to run on the web. We did it a couple different ways. Back last week, we used an NPM package, right? We used this connect package, and we used connect to create an HTTP server and serve out pages in the browser. In week 1, we used the HTTP module that comes with Node, and it has a create server method that would start an HTTP server. From now on, we're going to use something different. We're going to use a tool called Expres, which is basically a web application wrapper for our applications. So it's similar to Connect, except Expres actually has more functionality than Connect, and underneath it actually uses Connect. So Expres sits on top of Connect and extends the functionality that we get with Connect. That's what we're going to use today, and we're going to build 2 solutions. We'll build a lesson 4 part 1, doing a very basic simple Expres, just kind of like a hello world sample, and it will look pretty similar to the first version we did last week with Connect. Then the second part of class, we'll build a lesson 4 part 2 solution, and we're going to use this tool called the Expres Generator. And the Expres Generator will basically pre-build a site for us. It'll create a whole bunch of folders, and it'll actually give us a couple default pages. It will build the site, and we can actually run the site without putting any code of our own into it. So it's like a starting point for us, and then we'll go and add other stuff inside. So it saves us time, because a lot of things we would have to manually create a bunch of files and folders and install a bunch of packages. The Expres Generator, it just says, here's a starting application. We say install, and it'll give us this whole application we can build on. So we'll do that starting probably at 9 o'clock. First, we'll do our simple Expres example. first. So the Express homepage is express.js.com. Their documentation is fairly simple, easy to use. So what we're going to want to do is Express is an NPM package. This may be the single most popular package on NPM. I haven't actually looked. I meant to do this in the other classes this week, but I'm just curious to see exactly how often this is downloaded. So 318,000 downloads since yesterday. So that's how many NPM installs. Because it's pretty much fundamental to, I mean, can we do Node applications without Express? Yes. Will we see very many of them? No, not really. Almost any Node web application we see is using Express as that web server middleware. 7 million in the last month. So here's our simple hello world example. They've got it on the NPM site as well as on, this is basically what we're going to be doing. And if you look at the code, it's almost identical to the code we did for Connect. We're just using Express instead of Connect. And they've got the hello world sample. So let's create a lesson 4 part 1 folder for today. So I'll just go into my Node directory. So just go into wherever you've got your previous directories. And we'll make a lesson 4 part 1. Just be doing a simple Express hello world. We install Express, we create a single file, we run it. So I just have an empty directory here. And now I'm going to go to my command prompt and browse into that same directory. So we'll install Express in a minute. The first thing we want to do before we install Express is let's initialize NPM. As we did last week, we'll go through that little wizard and it'll build package.json for us. So what command do we need to do for that? Right words, other order. So it's npm init. And we got this message last week. This utility will walk us through creating a package.json. I'm not going to change anything here. I'll just accept all of the defaults so I can just hit enter until this process is done. I'm not going to change any of these values. It'll preview our JSON file and ask, is it okay? I'll just hit enter one more time. And we can see in my Windows directory, I now have package.json up here. So you just need to hit enter about 8 times, 9 times. So once npm's been initialized and we have package.json, so again, your command is npm space init and just hit enter until it's all done. Go take a look. Here's the command on Express. So we're going to install Express in this folder. And we're going to add -- save. We talked about that last week. What will the -- save do? We can install it without that, but -- save will do something else. It's going to save them in our folder. It's also going to do something else. Wolfgar?
It adds them as dependencies in JSON.
Right. It'll add Express and the current version into package.json automatically. So we'll just run this exact command. Just make my command prompt a little smaller. You can copy and paste it if you want. So it's npm install Express -- save. Exactly what we see in the documentation. That's the command I'm going to run. Okay, so it didn't install any dependencies that it said. Let's just check what's here. I'm going to open up my folder now in my code editor. So I'll open up our lesson 4 part 1 folder we're building. That's strange. Something didn't work right. Because I don't have node modules and I don't have those files added to my package.json. And try it again. There. That's interesting. No error message the first time, but it didn't actually install anything. So now it's built node modules. Now we got a lot of stuff because Express, as you can see, Express has a ton of dependencies. And some of those have other dependencies. So when we install Express, we get all of these things. And now if we look in my package.json, it's been updated. And it says Express, at least that version is required. Why my first version didn't work, I don't know. I ran the exact same command twice. Maybe it was a connection issue because it has to download those stuff from NPM. Does everybody have a node modules folder and you have the dependency listed in package.json?
So if we didn't have like a Json package, which is not able to run node for the
I'm thinking about that. I mean, when we actually run at runtime or when we try to install it? If we don't have
run the web or like we're trying to make like a node application, we would need a JSON.
No, I don't think it's actually required. We'll try it after. We'll create the application and see what happens if I take this file out of the directory. We'll try it and see. I think it will still run. So let's make a new JavaScript file, which we will call app. Typically when we use Express, this is the name of our kind of startup file that launches everything. Is app.js. Excuse me. And this version, we're just going to do a hello world. It's going to be almost identical to what we did last week when we used Connect, except we're going to use Express instead. And we're just going to follow the hello world example. In getting started, they've got a hello world. Here's our code. So we'll just go through it and then we'll add it. So we're going to link to the Express NPM package and we're going to instantiate an application. Right? We didn't include the new keyword here to call the constructor, but we could. It's implied in JavaScript. We may have talked about that last week. We're going to set up a get handler at our root page. So if the user browses to localhost 3000, we're going to send that response, hello world. We're going to start our server and listen on port 3000.
What is the backslash?
The backslash is the path. That's the URL path. Okay, if we look at, let's look at our example from last week. So here was our server, right? So these are the paths. When there's just a slash with no word, it's the home page, right? If there's no page name specified, just the home page. Okay, so let's link to Express and create a new Express. So you could, you're probably used to from Java, you could put the new keyword here. In JavaScript, it's implied. It's understood because JavaScript is weakly typed. We don't explicitly have to call the new method in order to instantiate an object from the Express class. Occasionally in JavaScript code samples, you'll see the new keyword being used. Most of the time, it just gets left out. So when we have a GET request made, so no page name specified, because it's based on connect, it has the same parameters, an HTTP request, an HTTP response, and then there's this optional parameter. We could leave it out if we want. Next. So next would be if after we've handled the request and sent a response, if we want to call another function, we then use next to invoke the next function that should happen after. So we can call res.send or res.end. It's basically the same thing. I'll say same as res.end. We're just sending some text back to the browser. We're not actually loading a page. We'll try loading a page later today. For now, we're just going to send a simple response. Now, we could write this code in one of two ways. We could do it in two commands. We want to call the listen command and specify port 3000. And then we just want to print a message to the console. So we can do it in two lines this way. Are you allowed to change the port? Sure you are. In fact, it took me 10 minutes to mark somebody's lab because one student, because I would download your code from GitHub, extract it, and then start it up at my command prompt. And then I kept going in my browser to localhost 3000 and somebody changed the port in their code to localhost 8000. And I kept wondering why it wasn't connecting. I'm looking at the code thinking, I'm sure your lab is right. Why isn't this working? And finally I realized you were running it on port 8000. I'm not sure if somebody in this section or in the Thursday section. So 3000 is just the default. Unless you change it with Express, that's where it's going to be. So we can try to run this. You could use either the node process or we could use nodemon. If you've installed nodemon, which will do auto restarts, you could use nodemon, which we tried to install globally last week. So if I just run the command nodemon app, I don't need the .js. So nodemon is starting and it's watching for changes. It says our server's running on port 3000 and we can try it out. When we go to localhost 3000, the root with no page name, it sends our response. What will we get here? If I hit enter to try to load this URL, what's going to happen? Wolfgar? You got it. Right. And we talked about this last week. We saw this with Connect. Why is it running a GET request? You got it. GET is the default HTTP method. What are the other HTTP methods? Because we're going to use them with Express. Post, GET. There are two other ones. If we're not sure, here, I'll just create a quick file. I'm not going to keep this. I'll create a quick file in my editor because it will give me code prompts if I put in a form. There are those two. There are actually two other methods. That file. There are two other methods. Well, they're in here. I'll show them to you. Let's go into our Express section here. So we've already talked about this. I've put these slides up on Blackboard. It's just what we've already talked about, how Express is related to Connect. And here's our Hello World sample. So all your code is on Blackboard as well. So we have these same objects, request and response. So I want to talk about these. We're actually talking about, these are called HTTP verbs. So get is one. So the idea is that the name of the command responds to some kind of request we want to make. So we have get and post. Let's think about these in terms of our create, read, update, delete functions. Typically, if we have a get request, what will we be doing on that page with our database? Create, read, update, or delete? Yeah, usually it's a read operation, or URL like domain.com/users/123. If we do a get request, that indicates to our code we want to go query the database 23 and return the information about that record, right? What about post? If we have a post request, are we doing create, read, update, or delete typically? Yeah, usually we're creating a new record. We've got a form and we're posting. The other two verbs that we'll use, actually, didn't put them in the slide. We'll look at them here. Here are the other two that we'll commonly use. Delete. Well, that should be obvious what kind of operation we're running if we get a delete request, right? If our URL is domain.com/users, I'll just type it in so we could actually see it. If we have a get request at that URL, our application is going to run a query on that record using that ID. If we have a delete request at that URL, what's our application going to do? Yeah, delete the record from that table with that ID, right? So the URL, the combination of the URL and the method, they're descriptive. They actually tell the application what it is to do. So if delete deletes, post creates, get queries, then the update, the method we actually will use for update is put. So if we were doing an put request at this URL, we'd have a form and we're processing an update. So we'll see those four methods. So in our code, here we've used get, but we might have an app.put, an app.post, or an app.delete instead if we're performing a different kind of operation on this page. And we'll see this later on when we start working with our database over the next couple weeks. So that's it for our simple hello world. Does anybody have any questions so far about this page? Or does it seem to make sense and we can move forward? Happy to answer questions if anything's not clear. I'm just going to check on Express here. If we go into the API reference, we may also see some of these examples of these methods. Not sure if I'm in the right page, but we'll see. Right, so they're here. So it says their documentation has entries only for the popular HTTP methods, which are the 4 we just discussed: get, post, put, and delete. And each one of those maps to some kind of create, read, update, or delete operation. One of the other nice things about using these is we can also very easily with Express build an API. So we could let some other application send our application requests, or they send us JSON and we send them JSON back. There's no HTML involved. And the name of the method, that will tell our API what kind of operation to run based on that method. Are we doing create, read, update, or delete? So we'll do this later on. We'll actually build an API using Node and Express. And it's almost the same as what we do if we're building a web page. The only difference is one has HTML on the end and the other one, that HTML interface just isn't there. We don't build it. Okay, I'm going to stop this server. And I just want to go out of this folder. I forgot to do this yesterday and I built part 2 in the wrong place. So just go back up 1 level so you're in your root node folder, which for me, for our course, is fall 2016 Friday, but you're probably just right in your root node folder. So now we want to look at the Expres Generator. So the Expres Generator quickly builds this application skeleton for us. So Expres Generator, also popular, 60,000 downloads in the last month. So from now on, we're going to use the generator to build all our applications. Each week, we'll use the generator and we'll build a new one. Your lab, your assignment, and we'll talk about assignment 1 shortly. Okay. We're going to use this to build stuff. Okay. We'll want to install it globally so that we can run it and create multiple applications. We're not just building one application. So in our command prompt, again, make sure you get out of your lesson 4 part 1. And let's install the generator with -g. We want to install it globally. So npm install -g express-generator. So same command, exact command you see up here in my browser. I'm running that identical command on my command prompt. It has no dependencies, so it installs quickly. And by installing it globally, it should put it in your roaming npm folder is that's the default location. So now it gives us commands. Don't run them yet. We should talk about this a little bit. If we type express -h, it shows us the different options. And when we use Express, there's two different, actually there's three different versions. So here's what'll happen. The first thing it's going to do is build out a whole bunch of files. It'll create a bunch of folders for us. It'll create an app.js, and it'll create a couple default pages for us. So as soon as we start the server, we actually will have a home page that will load in our browser with some text on it that we can change. There are a couple of different template engines. And when I talk about templates, what I'm talking about is this section. So far, what we've built with Connect and Express, we haven't built any models because we haven't been working with the database. We'll start doing that next week. And we haven't even built any views, right? All we've been doing is sending text responses. So we've been just dealing with the dispatcher part. That's this. Here's our dispatch. Or last week or in your lab, this is the dispatch part, where we are interpreting a certain URL and then giving our application an instruction what to do. So we handled dispatch and the control. We haven't done any views either. We haven't created any actual pages with HTML content. We've just been sending text responses to the browser, right? If we look at our hello world, if I view the source, it's text only. There's not a single HTML tag on here. Well, we actually want to build web applications that have a full HTML, CSS interface. When we use Node, we don't actually typically create files with HTML extensions. The reason is, remember, HTML, it doesn't support server-side code. So if we want to put variables from our server side, like someone's user profile on a page, we can't do that with an HTML extension. So we need to use some other kind of file type that will support HTML, but it's also going to support us putting in JavaScript variables and JavaScript code. So the views won't have HTML, and there are three options that come with Express. By default, our files, if we don't specify, our files will have extensions that are .jade. So Jade is a template engine. So we type certain code that looks kind of like HTML, and the Express compiler converts it into HTML and also will interpret our JavaScript values and code. We're not going to use Jade though, okay? And there's a reason. Jade is actually quite cool to code with. It cuts down, it reduces the amount of code we have to write, and it works very well. But instead, we're going to use a different template engine called EJS, which stands for Embedded JavaScript. The reason we're going to use EJS, I mean, I've used both before in this course, but I found EJS is better for you guys for one simple reason. Next summer, when you take enterprise computing, probably with Tom, part of that course is going to be doing MVC applications with C# and Visual Studio. Well, the syntax for the views in ASP.NET, it's very, very similar to EJS. So if we learn EJS in this class, doing the syntax with C# for MVC views will be almost the same. You don't really have to learn anything new. So this EJS here will make it easier in your next MVC course. Jade is totally different. And just to show you what they look like so you get an idea. Jade, maybe the examples here. I think this is. So this is what Jade looks like. So if we type this code in our view, it actually generates HTML like this. Notice there's no tags, there's none of the brackets, and you don't have to close anything. So from that perspective, it's nice. It auto closes the tags, but it's very fussy about your tabs and spaces because that's how it knows which tag goes inside of which tag. So if I just do that, I might break it. Like it will nest differently. Right now it puts so it's very, very fussy about this stuff. It's really clean. You know, you could put in And this little engine, it shows you the HTML that it produces. So if you really wanted to use Jade in this class, you could, but I'm going to use EJS instead. EJS looks more like PHP. So for example, so the tags are almost the same as PHP script tags. And again, these exact tags, this is exactly what the ASP.NET version uses. So if you really want to use Jade, you can, but I'm going to use EJS in all of our applications, and I would suggest you might do the same. You may want to play around with Jade. It's kind of cool. But I think we'll stick with EJS. So why am I going on and on about this? Well, because if we don't specify -e when we set up and generate an Expres Generator application, it's going to use Jade. So we have to override it and explicitly say -e when we're setting up our applications. So here's our code, and I'll show you what it'll do. We type the command express, the name of the application we want to build. It will actually create that folder. So up till now, we've been creating a lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. We won't even create that folder ourselves anymore. So next week we'll do Express lesson 5. It'll build a lesson 5 folder. It will put all this stuff in it. It will create package.json. It'll create a public folder for JavaScripts, images, and style sheets. It'll create a couple of root files. We'll talk about what those are, and a few default views. Ours won't be Jade, they'll have EJS extensions. And then we want to install all the dependencies needed. Do this. So let's run the command express -e. If we forget the -e, we're going to get Jade templates. -e will give us EJS templates. We'll call it lesson 4-part 2. So this will build a lesson 4 part 2 folder and create a working Express application inside. So it installs really quickly. If I go back, I now have a lesson 4 part 2. And I have this application's already set up. We'll poke around in here in a bit. There's two more commands we need to run to finish setting this up. So after we run the express -e lesson 4 part 2, and Express builds out a sample, we now have to do a CD lesson 4 part 2. We have to go into that folder. And it actually tells me these instructions in the command prompt. CD lesson 4 part 2. So I'll do that. So we'll go inside our new application folder. And then we want to run npm install with no package name. That will grab any dependencies that Express needs and put them in. So right now, notice we have no node modules folder. So when we run npm install, it's now going and grabbing all of Express's dependencies. It builds node modules and copies all those dependencies.
So that Express is not replace that.
Did the Expres Generator install correctly? When we tried doing this, npm install -g, Expres Generator, did your result look like this?
Yeah.
And it says C users, your username, app data roaming npm. So it looks like that.
It gave us like a couple of these lines, but not like that. So I just install it again.
Yeah, try installing the generator again with -g.
It's Express dash generator.
Yes. Whenever the package names have two words or multiple words, the words are always separated by a dash. There can't be any spaces in the package names. Did that do it? Okay. Right here. Express minus E lesson 4 part 2. Okay. So I'm going to close this solution and we'll open up our part 2 solution. So the way we just created this application, this is how we're going to create all our applications from now on. And we actually can run this just as it is. So now that I've done my npm install, if I type, and I can use nodemon an app, we can actually start this application. If I refresh localhost 3000, we actually have an Express application. There's our home page. And this is not just text, this is actual HTML. So it gives us a default style sheet, which we can change. We could add our own. We can use Bootstrap. We're going to do that later today. So here's our package.json. Inside of public, so the public folder is where we're going to put any assets, any static files, like images, front client-side JavaScript, or CSS. We'll put those, and there's our default style sheet they gave us, which we can change. Later on, like I said, we'll download Bootstrap, we'll download the Bootstrap style sheets, and we'll add them in here, and then we'll link to them. Here are our views. So here's our home page with our EJS templating. So it's mostly HTML. What would these represent? So we've got this repeated 3 times. Looks kind of like PHP. So it's saying our page actually says Express, right? 3 times in the title, the heading, and in that welcome message. But we don't actually see the word Express in our template. So where is that value coming from? Obviously, this value needs to be coming from somewhere else. Could be by default. Good guess. It's not. Well, let's look here how our MVC model works. We get a request. So in this case, the request is at localhost 3000. Our request, we don't load the view directly. How do we know which view to load? According to the picture. Which part of the application determines which view we want to load? Yeah, the controller interprets the request and decides which view to load. So this is the new part. So this value that's being passed must also be being provided in our controller, because the controller is calling this page. So it's calling this page and it's providing a variable called title. It's a server-side JavaScript variable that we're injecting into the HTML. This is the same as a PHP echo title command, $title. Okay, it's our equivalent. So where are our controllers? There's no folder here called controllers. Express uses a different word that means the same thing as controller. Express uses the word roots. I don't know why. I wish they'd called that folder controllers. We could actually change it if we want, but the generator builds this file. So let's look at how this works. Here's our index root or controller. This looks similar to what we did before. We require Express. We're using, instead of the whole Express app, we're just using a router for dispatching the URLs. So when we have a GET request at the root URL, we've got a new method here. Before we use res.send, res.write, or res. No, we're not printing a message. What does the controller do? Right, it's dispatching a view. It's loading one of our EJS templates in the browser. So when we have a GET request at the home page, go into the views folder and load the file index.ejs. So now let's come back to this variable. Where is this variable being set or passed to the view? Right here. So not only are we telling the application which view to load, but we're passing data to that view. And this is just a JSON object. It's just a JavaScript array. So we could pass multiple values to that view. Let's try that. Let's add, we have a variable here called title. Let's add another variable called message, and then we'll set that message in the root file and pass it as well. So let's put in a second p tag. And we'll put in the EJS. This is the EJS version of script tag. Equals means output or display. It's the same as echo. We want to display a second paragraph with a variable called message. So add this to your index.ejs. Save your change. NodeMon. Actually, when we change the views, notice NodeMon didn't restart. NodeMon will only restart when we change server-side code. It doesn't need a restart if we're just changing HTML. So all I did was add line 10. I haven't changed anything else anywhere in this application. If I go back to my browser now, why did we break it? Yeah, because it's looking for a variable that we haven't declared. PHP, if we try to message echo $, we wrote the code echo $, message, and we had no variable $, message, it would just print blank, right? No errors. Our variables have to be defined. So what do we need to do here? Or go away and have a message show up? Well, no, because request render, we can only call it once. We can only load one page at a time, right? We can't load multiple pages. But we want, right now we're passing a title variable to the page. We also want to pass a message variable. It's just an array here. We'll put in a comma. We're just going to add that in. So now we're going to load the index view, and we're going to pass in two variables, the title and the message. So you can see if we were running a query, a GET request, we would query the database, and this is how we would pass the data. Let's say it was a profile, user profile page, right? We could pass in first name, last name, email, picture, and then we can display all those variables. So now if I save, we've changed the server-side code. NodeMon should do a restart. It has. Our error should go away. So if this was PHP, all that code's in one file. We set variables and we have our HTML all together. With Node and Express, this process is divided and broken up. The views are only the presentation. Any logic, calculations, values we want to get or process, we do all of that here in the controllers or in the roots. So again, if we wanted to change the title, if we change it here, lesson 4, and save, NodeMon should restart again. And that variable's updated in all these places. So this is how we're going to do our processing and then decide what page to load. So the reason we use the generator is it gives us everything that we can just start creating views and calling them in the controllers. We don't have to build everything ourselves and code the whole setup of the application, install all the dependencies. The generator does it all. It saves us a lot of time. A lab today, I'm going to give you assignment 1 as well. And we'll use the generator for both of them. So let's take a 10-minute break here. I'll stop the video. We'll come back at 9:05. When we come back, we'll go over assignment 1. Okay, and then we'll keep going with this. We'll add some other pages. We'll add a header, footer. We'll add bootstrap. We'll see how the whole thing kind of fits together. And then you'll have all the pieces you need for both your lab and the assignment. Okay, let's take a break.